Yeah, welcome to our next JavaPro video. Hi, everybody. Today I have a special guest, Adam Bean. Welcome, Adam.
Hi, Markus. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. How are you doing?
Even better, you know.
Even better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
staying
great.
at home and hacking all the time and attending conferences.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for being with us at JCON. Was great to have you at. Was your third JCON, I guess?
I think, yeah. You invited me once. I think it was a few years ago. The problem was always the JCON collided with Java 1. And I never wanted to come. And I said, okay, this time, no excuses, because it is after the Java 1. And then I attended the JCON. And last year, the JCON became that great. Then I skipped the code one and just moved straight to JCON.
Yeah, great. Yeah, how was JCON for you? How was the keynote session for you? And you had a second session right after the keynote, right?
Yeah. So the prior JCONs were already great. They were in cinema in Düsseldorf, right? Yeah, yes. It was in Düsseldorf, exactly. And so I enjoyed because it was different audience. What I usually know the people, I know the people around because it was in Düsseldorf, so different developers than usual, I would say, in Munich area and Frankfurt. And so it was great. So I got lots of questions. And what I remember, the JCON last year, someone hacked with me the entire time. And I hacked on stage something with MicroProf and Jakarta E. And he came to me and he told me, this is a great technology because I'm actually not a Java developer. And I managed to implement everything from scratch with you. And so this was my moment from JCON. And this time was online. For me, what I was surprised by the quality of the preparation or moderation, how to call it, the onboarding of speakers. So I had a chance to chat with you before. Then it was handed over to someone else, and then so a nice trailer, and then the session started. Yeah. And I got lots of questions, nice responses from the audience. So for me, it was actually a very good experience.
Sounds good. Thank you, Adam. Maybe there are some people out there who are not not know who are you. So maybe you can introduce yourself, tell a little bit about what you are doing.
Yeah. So I'm a Java developer. I was lucky. I started with Java in 1995. So it was, I think it was, as I started, either before or a little bit after it was called Java. And I was from the very beginning, JDK 1.0. What I vividly remember is the JDK 1.1 introduction and 1.1.8 with the JIT compiler. And my plan was actually to work a little, learn lots of programming languages, and to be like multilingual developer. But this was it never paid off in my case. I stick with Java because I got so many requests from the beginning, and I'm a freelancer since then. So I always was a freelancer since 1997. I'm a freelancer. I spent all my time with Java backends for various customers. And at the beginning, there were huge companies, and the companies become smaller and smaller over time, which is interesting because Java became more and more productive. So now it's also interesting for startups. And I would say the last 5 years, I get lots of requests. People ask me now what we do with the front ends because our Java the problem solved in the backend, what is in the front end. And I ignore the front ends a bit. I mean, the JavaScript development a bit because it was crazy. And since 5 years, it looks more like Java. And this is what I did at the JCON. I hacked an example and answered questions live and created an application with nothing but web standards.
Yeah. And the session title of your session was what should happen in 2021 with Java backends and frontends. Yeah, I find this was a really good beginning of your talk because you told us a little bit about the history of Java backends and then the front end stuff. Yeah, what do you think? What changed the last year? So what was the most important things happened the last years?
Yeah, you asked me about a keynote, and keynote is a little bit more higher level. So I thought, predicting the future is always a good topic for a keynote. But the problem is you can predict which is reasonable, but you cannot predict the fashion. On the fashion things is this what drives the IT community, I would say. And let's say some things, like for instance reactive programming 5 years ago in my eyes didn't make any sense. Right now with Kafka and similar technologies, it makes a lot of sense. So some of the fashion-driven trends are just strange, so you cannot predict them. So what I try to do is to look at the past and try to project to the future and say, okay, this is the trajectory, so what can happen? And we have now a little bit pandemic, so there's some influences. So I try to explain my thinking process in the keynote and to make it more transparent. So this was the idea, because just saying, this will happen, and if I'm lucky, it will happen. And if I'm not, say, okay, sorry, it was hard to predict, that this would be a little bit boring, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, you started with the front end side, and explained what was first. So we have the fat clients, then HTML incompatible browsers, rich clients, and so on. So what were the most important steps, the most important last steps in web development?
I think my observation is that the front end is very much like what we saw in Java. And at the end of all the cycles, what happens, there is standardization. So this is what I see. So most of the libraries and frameworks were created like jQuery because the browsers were not compatible, and now they are very compatible. So some of the frameworks don't make any sense anymore, and some developers try to use them because they learn them, but actually it's no more required. So and now if you so what we have right now, what happens today, all browsers are compatible. And the problematic browser was the Internet Explorer, which is more or less Chromium or Chrome right now, because Microsoft just reuses the Chromium engine behind the scenes. And the most problematic browser is probably even Safari from Apple, because the least compatible of all. But this is really good. So I mean, whatever I showed you in my session still works on Safari, but this is it is with the lesser feature. So so what we already have in the browser, let's imagine projected to Java, like we have OpenJDK everywhere. So what you can have, probably not the version 15, let's say version 11. So this is what we get everywhere. And some browsers like Chrome have no Java 16 capabilities, and Safari has probably Java 10 or something like this. This would be like the parallel. So, and if you have that, you can just focus on Java 10. And this is what I do in the session is, okay, look, forget the frameworks, learn the basics and what you can achieve with the basics. And the basics are already crazy productive. So let's start with the basics and then, extend. If you need frameworks, pick the frameworks. And this is what I also do in my projects, actually. So we start with the basics, and if frameworks are needed, they're obvious, right? So give you an example. Actually, yesterday I hacked something for myself, and I wanted to parse HTML in Java. So I thought about that, 10 minutes investigation, index of substring, whatever. It's like, this is crazy. And I took JSoup, this is an external library which parses HTML extremely well. So I tried, without, after 50 minutes, okay, crazy, don't do it, pick a library, and I'm happy right now. And exactly the same process, what I talked now, what I showed during my talks is JCON. So I just started with the basics, like, okay, but I need, a nice date picker, so I picked one. So this is the idea. So exactly.
Yeah, we heard this many times ago. So this is a revolutionary technology for the web. So first we had this rich client. So you have to decide, do you want to develop your client with Flash or JavaFX and so on. Then we had the Angular, and now we have the web components. And many of my clients, they had the problem. This was always a promise, but we never were able to to realize this promise. So they had to build to renew their frontends again and again. So is this promise with web components really true, that now we can really develop stable web interfaces? They can be used for maybe 10 years or so?
Yes, I think so, because there's a common misconception, and I don't know from where it comes among web developers, what they are thinking. I heard it several times, but never had the opportunity to ask the speaker or developer know what she or he means by that. So like components are fine-grained. So they are meant, to be like a UI controls, like buttons. That you can do this with web components. What I use web components for have to coarse-grained pieces like header, navigation, main, footer. And for me, this is the killer feature. But it seems like the web community doesn't see this, or they believe that the web components is, for unknown reason, it is not possible to create a web components which contains other components. So this is what I do. So I structure. For instance, I'm after this meeting here, I will start with an application, a web app. And what I do first is I got a mockup. And what I will do is I take a look at the mockup, and there's like a header, there's a navigation area, and there's a footer. And I will create web components with the same name. So I will reflect the structure of the web components. This is going to be the shell for my app. And then we'll use, the nicer looking web components for, I don't know, date pickers or calendars or whatever my clients would like to have. And it seems like right now, many try to use, they try to use Angular or React or Vue.js to have the shell. This is really not needed. And then they use web components because all the frameworks are more or less forced to create or consume web components. It's just standard. You cannot live without web components. It's part of the browser. And so you have now a mix of both. So in my eyes, just learn web components. You will have to learn them anyway. And then you can decide whether you will still invest more time for Angular or React or whatever. So and 10 years, that is actually very possible, because my running joke is the marquee tag is 20 years old and it still works in browsers. So it's very possible. So what could happen in one point of time, that the browsers introduce something like deprecation mechanism in Java, but it's not available yet. So for now, the web component should be viable for more than 10 years, actually. And also the tricks what I showed you at the conference, JCON, during my talk, like I created so data binding with JavaScript. This was not a standard JavaScript feature, but it was standard extension of JavaScript feature. So in Java, we have like the multi-line strings. And in JavaScript, in JDK 16 is the preview feature. It is already GA. So I confused that with Java records, which are preview. So I think it was released in JDK 15. We have now the three like multi-line string in Java. It was not possible before. And in JavaScript, this is normal with placeholders, and there are several libraries which extend that. So this is like, I took a Google extension called lit.html and was able to create edit features, but the extension is like 400 lines of JavaScript code. So if this dies, I could either fix it for my clients, or I could. There are several alternatives to lit.html. So standards first, I think. This is what I observed for years. So of course, the problem is standards become boring in one point of time, and there are some inventions left and right, but they are always merged back to standard. So this is the observation. Whatever you do in one point of time, you become commodity and you become part of the standard, and you have to innovate more to find some more innovation, and it becomes standard again. And what I try to do is, my strategy is just to ignore some crazy innovations, because in one point of time they will merge into standard, and this is why I'm still happy and not crazy.
Yeah, good, interesting. Yeah, let's have a look on the backend side. So on the backend side, maybe the last 15 years or so, we had Java Enterprise and Spring. So, but the last few years, something happened.
Yeah.
So
what happened is actually, and I didn't saw that. So this was the interesting part. So we already had chat for years, and the last 3 times what I did at the JCON, I created a application from scratch with application servers with the let's call it old technology, and I always challenge my audience. Find something which is slow, find something which is not productive, and there was nothing because it is really fast and productive, but still old application servers. The problem is the perception, old and old-fashioned and so forth. And what changed in the last 3 years, and it seems like it happened at the same time for different runtimes, is the observation that usually the old application servers were complicated because you could deploy multiple applications to one application server at once. And therefore, you need a mechanism for isolation, class loader, you need a mechanism for monitoring of every application, you need better security models, you need hot deployment, and you need lots of complexity. And what I didn't saw is, I think 2013, I wrote a post something like, one application per application server, one war per domain, 7 years ago. But the problem, the application servers were small enough that it didn't matter for me. So I could just use the application server with one war and no one cared. Now, the people from Helidon and Quarkus, what they, for instance, did in OpenLiberty, they did the observation and say, what if we optimize this one-to-one fact? So if we know that there is one war per runtime, then what we can do, we can just skip all the deployment descriptors and all the stuff. We just package everything together. And the cool story is the application servers like WildFly, Payara, OpenLiberty, stuff like that, they were always cloud native because they separated very strictly the application from the infrastructure. And you mentioned Spring Boot. Spring didn't this ignored the fact they tried to ship everything at once. What the new runtimes are doing, the like Helidon and Quarkus, almost identical. They separate still. They have one executable jar, which is your business code, and let's say 20 to 100 jars, which are basic infrastructure, which only changes if there is new version of the framework. And what we got right now, for me, is the best time ever, because now I see the same APIs I saw for 20 years with runtimes which are smaller than anything in the history of Java. So if you start Helidon or Quarkus, it is smaller than Tomcat, which is empty. So it is the smallest possible size and speed, and this is where the frameworks are competing with each other. The Quarkus says, okay, we have great GraalVM integration, and Helidon is saying, okay, and we are the fastest, and we adopt microprofile immediately. So they are competing on different levels, but at the end of the day, as developer, you don't care about that. You just use the API, and you don't care about Helidon and Quarkus because I only see the API, which is, by the way, the same true for web. I only use the web components. I don't care about the browsers. I don't care about the frameworks. I use my API. So what we see parallel, in the front end, we have my web components and web standards. In the back end, I have microprofile and Jakarta E. But what we got in the back end, let's say, are new browsers, which are very lean, right? This is what happens. The same API with new runtimes. And in the front end, we got the same browsers, which became more compatible. But at the end of the day, we have almost identical environment in backend and frontend.
And what do you think? How important here is GraalVM? Is this really the game changer? And this is really the future of Java? Should everybody move over to GraalVM native images, or are there still reasons to use conventional JVMs?
Maybe I would say GraalVM is the huge Java saver, I would say, or because it makes Java exciting again, I would say. With GraalVM, you can do stuff which was not possible before. So, for instance, GraalVM makes Java perfectly viable for serverless. If it starts in 10 milliseconds, I can just deploy, which I actually do. My microprofile applications are AWS Lambdas, and they work just great. So it would be harder without GraalVM. The biggest feature of GraalVM, I would say, is the multilingual support. So you can actually run R code and combine it with Java code, and this is a big feature. And I misuse GraalVM to create command line utilities for my daily work. So I can, just create a executable, push it to a local bin or whatever, and then this is my path. I can just launch Java in 10 milliseconds, does something, and then just like a command line utility. And with the native image, I would say it is not that important yet, because the startup time doesn't matter a lot always. In some cases, yes, but in the future, GraalVM could become even faster than the normal Java because they innovate, and this is a nice future. So I would say GraalVM is one of the most important projects, but it's not like you have to use GraalVM to be competitive. So lots of my clients just use OpenJDK and they are perfectly fine. So, but GraalVM is one of the most exciting projects, and I actually track GraalVM for years. I took a look at the project called Maxwell, and then it disappeared, and I had a chat with GraalVM guys. Yeah, but they renamed it to Maxine, and then Maxine to GraalVM. So this is one of the project started actually at some time, so it's nothing new, but now it became some traction because it's a hugely complex project.
Yeah, this is very interesting. Yeah, many people they think about using functions as a general purpose for programming, as a programming model. And Java has to compete more and more with these serverless functions and native cloud function stuff. So do you think Java can compete with these technologies, or are the functions suited for programming big applications?
It already does. So now on my YouTube channel, there's a talk called Serverless Java, and which what I played with is with different functions technology. And at the end, I created a micro-profile application, stock application, with JAX-ORS, so I mean stock REST resource, and pushed it as native AWS Lambda. And I would say this is highly competitive because you can just use, your old programming model, and you can push an unchanged microservice as a Lambda function, which is highly productive. Usually, you will have to use the proprietary AWS, API, which no one usually. I'm not interested in learning, proprietary APIs. And then I can reuse my complete micro-profile programming model and push it as a Lambda. And so, having said that, Lambda for me is not a general programming model because, as you maybe remember, as you still programmed, right, develop code, that 10 years ago there were command pattern, and the command pattern was very highly praised. That is like, everything is decoupled, but it was really painful to work with because command pattern means, function called execute, object in, object out, and you can compose whatever you like, but it was really hard to understand what's going on in such a system. The same is true with Lambdas, plus we got, the distributed factor to it. But I would say Lambdas are great as integration functions. If you have some data already in the cloud, I can deploy a cloud Lambda, which or a function which listens to the data stream and gets and wakes up and passes the data to me, for instance. So there are absolute killer use cases for Lambdas, but I don't see a Lambda as a general purpose programming model. Sometimes it can become cheaper to work with Lambdas, but the systems under load, a runtime which runs all the time is right now still cheaper.
Yeah. What do you think about Kubernetes? Is this now a de facto standard? So is it actually possible to build applications without using Kubernetes? Is it so so important to use it? What do you think?
Kubernetes is cloud, so it is like if you have something runs on Kubernetes, then it will run on all clouds, which supports Kubernetes, or all clouds actually. But I don't think you have always used Kubernetes because it comes with lots of overhead, lots of YAML. I actually expect what should happen in the few years that you will collocation. So I think the cheapest possible thing you can currently do is to rent some machines from Hetzner or whatever, you get them very cheaply, and then install the infrastructure on these machines. And I see more and more startups doing this, and they are cheaper than anything else. And if you have one app, you don't need Kubernetes. Kubernetes becomes more interesting if you are a larger company with lots of projects and you do different environments. Then Kubernetes helps you with that, because you can have namespaces and there's more like organized. This is like exploded application server almost. So indeed, if you would compare application server, Java EE old application server to Kubernetes, you will find parallels, almost identical. Deployment descriptors, YAML, like not load balancing, clustering back then is what Kubernetes does with ingress. So it is then with throttling. So we have health check. So actually one-to-one, you can have the features. So I would say, I would expect in a few years that there's a moving back from Kubernetes to something simpler. And it could be like Docker without Docker, just the Docker standard without the Docker product, and have a stripped down Linux, which just runs all the stuff. And yeah, this is what I would expect. For larger companies, I think Kubernetes is reasonable. For smaller mid-range companies, it's optional, full optional.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay. You mentioned in your keynote that the upcoming JDK versions, they will be very exciting and for Java developers. So what's coming up next?
So this is already there. So Java records are huge. I mean, Java records are already there. So it is like and the possibility to have with one constructor, with one line, a Java object which is immutable with getters, setters, and toString and equals and hash code. And really interesting if you are a persistence provider, for instance, that's a JPA or microstream. Yeah. What you could do, you can, for instance, transfer slices of the objects back to the client. And already there are some micro-profile providers, JSON-B, which are able to serialize Java records to JSON. So there is nothing to do. So this one. Then there are integrations with the GPU. Then native integrations, so like replacement of JNI. Then we get I forgot the JEP. It is like pattern matching. And what pattern matching does is you could use in switch statements, you could use like not only strings rather than Java types. And with that, you can have something like destructuring in JavaScript. So what it means is I have an object and I only interested in two fields. I think with that, it will be possible because you can map any Java object to a Java record. Then we get multi-line strings already, which are great for templates. And what we also got is completely different. This is not JDK feature, JavaFX. I think the JavaFX right now is completely underestimated, the power of JavaFX, because what you can do right now with JavaFX, the same what you can do with Flutter, is not necessary for desktop. Rather than creating an app with Java, compile it with GraalVM to executable images, and run the application on Android and iOS. So before I learn Flutter, Flutter is nice, but it's still from Google. I would trust more, Johan Voss and Gluon to because they do it for years, to have a continuous support in JavaFX. So this is also very interesting, I would say.
Okay. And what do you expect from Project Loom?
Oh, Project Loom is great because I would say the reactive programming will just be less exciting for request response, and would only make sense for architectural use cases where I have a Kafka stream and I would like to consume the events. And now reactive program is often misused to have to have a better scalability, which introduces additional complexity. So Project Loom is great, I would say, because the latest strategy, what I observe is they try, to have the old programming model with a way better scalability, which is the way to go. So I don't have to relearn new things, right?
Adam, thank you for your time, and it was great to talk to you, and it was great to have you at JCON.
Yeah.
And everybody who is interested in what should happen in 2021. Should now watch the keynote video with Adam. It's now online. And if you liked our video, please subscribe our channel. See you soon and goodbye.
Bye.